time, so I'm not sure which is first. Is it the data stuff first?
It's the data stuff first.
Yeah.
Right, I'll do a proper thing now that we're recording. Okay, everyone, thank you very much for coming to our second meeting of the Town and City Centre Commission. This is our second meeting, as I say, and it's the first time that we'll be having guests coming to speak to us. If you're attending the commission today, please keep your microphones on mute. Sometimes it helps if you switch your camera off if you're not speaking. It helps with the recording, and it stops the it jumping around and stuff when people are speaking. So today's session is about looking at an economic review of the borough. We're going to have we've been circulated some sheets in advance of this meeting that hopefully you'll be able to access on your iPad if you're using them, if you're a councillor, or we're sending them by email to the other guests as we speak. And if you're another guest, feel free to put your hand up to speak. I know you're here to speak about item 3, but if you've got anything that you'd like to say on item 2, then we'd be happy to hear your points of view. We'll do introductions in a second, and then we'll move to, if you want to include any declarations of interest in your introduction, that would be helpful to move things along quickly. And then we'll get straight into the first bit, which is the economic review. So I'm Richard Beecham. I'm the Cabinet Member for Housing, Regeneration and Growth at Cheshire West and Chester Council, and I'm the Chair of this Commission for the remaining 5 meetings, including this one. And I'm really interested in what's going to happen today. So thank you for everybody taking part. I'll read out names and people can introduce themselves. That'll probably be quicker. The next name on the list is Councillor Gibbon. You're still on mute. You're still on mute, Lynn. Still on mute.
That's right.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, shadow portfolio holder for Housing, Regeneration and Growth.
Thanks, Lynn. Next person is Bethany Skinner.
Hi, Beth Skinner. I'm a project officer in the Chester Regeneration team.
Thanks, Beth. Gillian Edwards, Councillor Gillian Edwards.
Hello, I'm Gillian Edwards. I'm one of the ward councillors for Weaver and Cuddington Ward.
Hi, Gillian, thank you. Next person on the list, Sam Naylor.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Naylor. I'm a councillor for Northwich Witten, which is basically the town centre.
Okay, next person is our Disability Officer, Cornell, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi everybody, I'm Cornell. I'm the Senior Access Officer for Cheshire West and Chester, and I'm excited to see what we can do for access in the towns and city centres.
Brilliant, thank you, Cornell. Caroline?
Hi, Caroline Thomas. I'm the Regeneration Programme Manager for Northwich.
Charles?
Hello, I'm Councillor Charles Fieffield. I'm Deputy Chairman of the Commission, and I'm a councillor for Weaver and Cuddington Ward. In my day job, I'm a chartered surveyor at Fieffield Glynn, so I'll put that down as a declaration of interest. I also work there with my father, John Fieffield, who I made reference to, as I did in the last meeting, simply because of his involvement with markets and also retails over a long period of time. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Charles. Gareth from Neston.
Hey, I'm Gareth. Gareth Briddick, Neston Community Youth Centre. I run the charity.
Thanks, Gareth. Stringfellow.
Hold on. Hi, I'm Emma Stringfellow. I'm the Executive Director at Action Transport Theatre, which is based in Whitby Park in Ellesmere Port. I'm also a trustee at Chester Mystery Plays and also at Chester Municipal Charities, which is based in the Blue Coats in Chester.
Thanks, Emma. Una Meehan.
Hello, my name's Ona. I'm here in representing GFM, which is Good for Nothing, and I'll tell you a little bit about that shortly. But I'm also the Director of Partnerships and Senior Lecturer at the University of Chester. And like Emma, I'm a governor and trustee at various organisations, including Chester Zoo, where I'm the Vice Chair of their advisory panel within education.
Fantastic, thank you, Una. Steph Ramsden.
Hi, I'm Steph. I'm the Economic Growth Manager for Cheshire West and Chester. Really excited to see some results out of the committee to see what we can do things different and challenge ourselves.
Thank you, Steph. And last but not least, Councillor Dixon.
Thank you. I thought you were going to forget me, Richard.
Never.
I'm Sam Dixon. I'm the councillor for one of the 3 councillors for Chester City and Garden Quarter Ward, which includes Chester City Centre.
Brilliant. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Welcome. So, without further ado, you've got a PDF attachment that came with the minutes. With the agenda, and it's a dashboard that's been produced by the Insight and Intelligence team at Council about the kind of economic situation in our borough. Steph, are you planning to introduce this item for us?
Yeah, if Beth could just share the screen, and then I think we can run through some of the indicators on there. So I think we have pulled this together across numerous different data sets. Some are more refreshed than others, shall we say? So I think once the screen's shared, I will start to take you through that.
If members of the committee or anybody from the commission wants to raise their hand as we go through, I'll keep a track, and I'll try and keep us in the same order as we go.
Okay.
So just raise your hand, and if you do your presentation, Steph, and we'll take all of the questions together at the end, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's great. So I think what we wanted to do is we were really looking for some of the economic and the socio-demographic information as discussed at the last commission. I think it was 2 weeks ago, the meeting, and some of the data that we've got is more robust than others. I think so. If we go through some of the population data, we've got some of the age profiles across our different areas. Sorry, someone got a hand up. Charles, have you got your hand up?
Yes, and it was just I'll ask at the end.
Yeah, I've got you down, Charles. I'll do all the questions at the end, Steph. You just grab.
Oh, okay. All right then, great, thanks. So I think looking at the trends across the boroughs, we know that we've got 21% of our population are over 65. And I think looking at the ethnic minority groups, we've got 5.3% across those. I think we have seen an increase in the population, and we are anticipating that to go on until 2035. And I think not dissimilar to any other area, we are seeing a higher proportion of population in the 65 plus area. So I think that's something for us to consider going forward about who our spaces are for and how we use them. I think looking at our economically active population, in 2011, it was 70.2%, which was really good. I think what we're hoping to do in future dashboards is try to identify what that impact of COVID has done to some of those figures. So we know that we have seen a huge increase from March to May this year on claimants of universal credit. Now we are getting a new data release on the universal credit claims for the start of June. That comes out tomorrow. They come out on a Thursday once a month, but they will be until June. And looking at some of the figures around COVID, is we are seeing a high proportion of people have been furloughed. So I think we're looking at around 60,000 people have potentially been furloughed through that period, and also claiming the self-employed allowance. So it's a similar benefit to universal credit, but it's targeted at self-employed folks. So we've got around 10,000 people claiming self-employed credit. And I think what we do need to bear in mind around that is people who've been furloughed or the movement around working from home is there are a lot less people actually working in our town centres. So if you think of the council's offices and some of our financial services and professional services, there are less people to actively spend in our town and city centres at the moment. So we are hoping to see some of that recover shortly. So I think the table on the right just shows you some of the average claimant counts across the areas, which, you know, I'm happy to take questions on that at the end. So Beth, if you could just move it down slightly. So I think one of the challenges around qualifications for us is the number of people who have actually got a qualification and also the working population with level 4 or higher. And I think looking at how we support that going forward, there's lots of different schemes around engaging people to either partake in work qualifications or other types of training and enhancements. And then I think the census data from 2011 that actually shows down the health impacts around people, so you can just draw a bit of a comparison on the areas for there. If you just move down, please, Beth. So I think we were talking about footfall on the last call, and I think what we wanted to do is we wanted to show the different footfall areas. I think what we have found is that a number of our areas use the springboard process, which has got one methodology in every area. So we are able to almost compare apples with apples there. I think when we look at some of our other areas, we've got Winsford, which doesn't use Springboard. It is actually a different platform. And then we've got Ellesmere Port, which is a mixture of the Port Arcade's own footfall counters, which is not Springboard. It's a different brand. Now, they've asked us not to share that data because they feel it's commercially sensitive. So although we have access to those numbers, we don't have a trend analysis for you on that. On the footfall figures that we have here, we've actually started doing manual footfall counts as part of the High Street Task Force that we had the visit. So we are committed to do those for the next year. So the next count is due to take place in August. So we will be able to do kind of a month-on-month comparison. The first one was taken in March, and that would give us some of the trend analysis. So not surprising, really, looking at the drop in footfall since COVID hit, but we are seeing some areas recover faster than others. So I think we will look at this on a monthly basis and obviously try to understand periods of the day, most popular times, and things like that. So we just wanted to show that as a comparison, really. And I think one thing it has told us is that, you know, maybe that's something we would want to do for all our town centre areas, to understand which ones are successful and what those trends are. But at the moment, we don't hold that for all of them. Then I think there was also a challenge around vacancy rate on stores and also the change of use. So we just wanted to do that on a bar chart so that you can understand the vacancy rate year on year. This is taken from the annual monitoring report as part of the planning report that comes out. So we wanted to show that. And I think looking at vacancy rates, we are seeing them coming down. I think this count was taken in April time, so we may want to refresh that quite soon after the commission, just to understand the impact of COVID on some of the sessions I've been attending around high street recovery and economic recovery. We do know that a number of stores in areas have closed, so they will come through as empty in the next few months. Then I think on the change of use, I think it has been quite challenging to get some of that data out there from planning information, but the changes are summarised around the bottom. So I think we have seen quite a lot of shops turn into cafes, restaurants and takeaways, and also professional services. I think what we haven't seen in a lot of areas, which maybe we would have expected, is more of a change towards residential. So that might be something that we see in the future. So I think that comes to the end of the dashboard. Happy to take any questions, or if there's other data sets that we would like to see in there. This is really a starter for 10.
That's great. Thank you, Steph. So I've got Charles's hand up first, and just to reiterate the point that you made there, if there's anything that the Commission wants to see further on top of this, then if you let us know when you ask your question, we can make a note of that and we can see if we can circulate it ahead of the next Commission. Charles, do you want to go next? Do you want to stop share? Oh, should we keep the screen? No, we won't keep the screen on. We'll crack on. If we need to go back to it, we can put it back up again. Go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, great. No, I like the stats that have come through there. I think if we're able to get these on a regular monthly update, that would be very, very helpful, especially in relation to I think the claimant counts, given just how unpredictable the economy is going to be at the moment. I had a couple of comments which I wrote down, which I thought would be helpful going forward. In relation to the population estimates, is there any way of breaking down the 16 to 64 age range? Because my recollection of the way I used to go shopping and the way I used to look at town and city centres, for example, before I was 30 and I became a parent, seemed to be rather different to how I go to town and city centres now. So not that I'm recommending perhaps a club 18 to 30 demographic, but I suspect that could be quite useful to know, especially, for example, the difference potentially between Chester and other areas of the borough, where obviously with a student population there, that it's gonna there will be quite a significant impact. So I think if we were able to have a couple more demographic, that 16 to 64 I think is a bit over simplistic. Also, if we were able to put, in the same way that on general health we've also gone and put the percentage within the bar chart, I think that would be useful to see if there are any major differences in population. So, for example, all other things being equal, one might think that Tarpley has got a slightly older population than other parts of the borough, although obviously that's rather difficult to see with the scale there. Mm-hmm. That does also lead into, I do wonder whether or not on these stats, and generally there's a point I raised last time, as to whether or not we might want to have a tier 1 and a tier 2 in terms of the town and city centres and the high street, because I think we've got the big four in terms of Chester, Ellesmere Port, Northwich and Winsford, and then Neston, Parkgate, Frodsham, Helsby and Tarpley are significantly smaller, and we're not really comparing like with like. So I just wondered whether or not it's possible to do a sort of tier 1 for the big four, where there's going to be a lot more information, and then a tier 2 for the other three, and potentially slightly more than that. It might be a better look at it. That also then leads me down to the small print at the bottom of page 1, where it's referring to the data, and I can't help but notice that there seem to be a number of wards missing. Now, I appreciate that may well make sense, but actually, are we looking at the borough as a whole? Because I can't see Sorgall and Mollington or Christleton and Huntingdon within the Chester remit, as an example. I can't see Williston and Thornton in either the Neston or the Ellesmere Port figures, and Farnton, Tattenhall and Malpas don't appear to exist at all. Now, I appreciate, because of the size of the retail centres, it may not be relevant, but if we're going to start looking at figures in relation to a borough-wide exercise, I think we do need to take into account all of the wards, because apart from anything else, if there aren't any shops in Farndon and Malpas and Tattenhall, where are they all going shopping? Are they all going to Chester? Are they all coming to Winsford? Are they all going to Tarpley? So I do think that those figures need to be included in some way, shape or form. Apart from anything else, I'm sure the councillors from those wards will be a bit disappointed they're missed out if it doesn't look like their constituents matter. On page 2, it was a Northwich specific comment because of the difference that the demolition of Barons of Weaver Square has made. Are we able to split the 18 and 19 figures to show what proportion of those were down to Weaver Square? So in other words, can we see, is there a trend in that some of these town centres are showing that the level of vacancy is increasing, some of them are staying the same and some of them are going down? Well, at the moment it looks like Northwich, we simply can't tell that, because it looks like the entire of it is simply due to Weaver Square being demolished.
Yeah, well, we can look at some of the qualitative narrative around that as well, Charles. I think this is, we wanted to pull all the data together as quickly as possible. I think we can put some narrative around it. We just wanted to check that we've got some of the data set right first before we start to do that.
No, that's fine. And then again, within those blocks, if we're able to put the actual number of units that we're referring to, because the vacancy rate, for Chester and Ellesmere Port may be very, very similar, but the number of actual units may be very different. And it certainly will be very different in relation to Winsford.
I think that can be quite challenging, where maybe you've got one shop unit that's been knocked through into two. So you've got one smaller unit that's maybe been knocked into 3. So I think that is quite challenging to do. We can try and interrogate the data in more detail, but that will be quite challenging to do unless we actually go out and do it visually every time, which again is a challenge.
Yeah, no, well, it's just, as I say, it's just if the information is accessible, then great. If it isn't, then fair enough. And then the final bit was in relation to change of use, which I do think that's quite interesting.
Yeah, me too.
But is there any more detail in terms of it's showing the major changes, but actually what does that mean in terms of, we did Chester in comparison to the rest of the borough, did it have a low number of cafes, restaurants and takeaways to begin with? Probably not, but it may have done. And is it a question of that we're seeing all of our town and city centres are moving towards each other in the terms of mix of planning uses, or are they still very unique? So again, that is great figures, but is there anything we can have in the background in terms of, the number of, the overall number of shop units within those use classes? I appreciate, again, that figure may not be simple to find out, but if we could at least ask the question, because I think that may also show stuff. And again, if we were able to show it in April 18, April 19 and April 20, that also might show some trends.
Could we, that's an interesting point, could we ask, the planning team are obviously coming to talk to the 5th meeting of the commission, and do you think maybe we could ask them to cover a bit of information about that in that meeting, to give a bit more narrative about the different types of planning applications that they're seeing and what the general trend is? Would that make sense?
Good idea. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, for that. And also, I mean, I think some of these are permitted developments, so in other words, they don't need permission, they can just do it. So that may be useful to be able to, again, for the planning team to be able to put some commentary on that certain changes of use you can do it effectively automatically, whereas others you need formal planning permission. It is still a change of use, but it's permitted development. Okay.
Thanks, Charles, for those points. The bit about the footfall figures, the council's obviously produced this kind of open dashboard, and I have asked for the footfall figures to be included in that so that all councillors can see that regularly. I don't know whether all of these things will be on there, but certainly the footfall figures are on, because I think it's important that people understand what's happening in their town centres. Is that all okay? We got those notes made. I was going to ask a quick question, Seth, just before I go to the others, about the 60,000. Is that for our sub-region, or is that just in Cheshire West? 60,000 staff that have been.
Well, it's 50,000 Fairlow, 10,000 on the
Pavement.
Yeah, I can get the exact figures for you and circulate them.
Is that in just? But that's just in Cheshire West.
Yeah, just Cheshire West.
Okay,
yeah, I think it's 109. It's 109,000 across Cheshire West, Cheshire East, and Warrington.
A lot of people, isn't it? Okay, Sam Dixon. Charles, do you want to put your hand down?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Richard. Just a couple of things. I don't think it's just, furloughed staff who are coming away from the city centres. I mean, I had the pleasure of having my hair cut this week, and the hairdressers are going mobile because they don't want the overheads of a shop unit. So I think we need to factor that in as well. I think it will come through on the self-employed figures.
Yeah.
The COVID dashboard that the council's producing does include Google footfall figures, which are very interesting. And I just wondered if that's helpful to us in terms of not just the springboard figures.
I think it's a really good point.
Something to consider.
Yeah,
I think we should include that next time. I think that's really good. We can just include that slide off the report because they're producing it every week. That's a really good point. It shows about usage of parks, usage of supermarkets, and all that kind of stuff. That's a really good idea. Yeah, good idea, Sam.
I agree about permitted developments. I don't think that they're included in that change of use, and I think we only know about them in Chester because we're in a conservation area, so we get notified. I don't know whether everybody else gets notified of changes of use in permitted developments, but that there is a lot in Chester City Centre that's gone over to residential from office. So. And Charles is right. You wouldn't necessarily know about it, but that's happened sort of under the radar. Only, I mean, it's a massive job to pull out all those changes of use. I think from
that's why I think. Sorry to interrupt. That's why I think if somebody from the planning team can come and just give us a narrative about each town, it might be less laborious work for them, but at least we would get an idea as a commission about what's going on. I agree. That'd be a huge amount of work.
And finally, while I take on board what Charles is saying about Farndon and Tattenhall, this isn't a level playing field, and the only way, it was a point that was raised in the High Street subcell yesterday for Chester about business rates, and the sort of, it would be, I think, to get a picture of sort of the size of the economies that we have in different places in the borough. I think the only way you could reflect that is in the business rates that are being paid. Now, the economic development team will know that because they've been paying out to businesses, millions of pounds.
Good point.
So is there any way that, because, if you were to describe this graphically, Chester would be a great big bubble, and the others would be, what size bubble would they be? It doesn't need to be sort of actual figures. I think it just needs to show the size of the different town and city centre economies, because I think the economy in Waverton is very much smaller than the economy in Chester, or in the economy in Hanbridge compared to other parts of the borough. Now, I'm not suggesting we go down to every single ward level and every parade of shops, but I do think we need to have a sense of perspective about which are the biggest economic drivers across the borough.
That's a really good idea. We've got this property overview in the next commission. I don't know whether we could turn it around in that time, Steph, but do you think we could look at postcodes and how much we paid out in grant support to different businesses, and just see if we could map it in some way clever, see if Bev can do it.
Am I right in thinking that business rates is going to be the way that we sort of map the economies?
It will be one of the ways. I think the business rate grant and the classification may be slightly different because we had a discretionary fund as well. So funds won't be mapped from business rates because a lot of those businesses were not registered for business rates. So I think it'll give us a really good overview of where the 70 odd million went, and geographically. And I think we have already done that from a numbers and from a value perspective as well. So I will see what I can get from that.
You've got one thing that where that how many businesses are there in each centre, and then it's sort of the scale of those businesses in each centre as well.
Because it won't show us how much money they're generating for the local economy or how much they're turning over, but it will at least show us
rateable value.
Yeah, rateable value
Yeah.
will show us what size of businesses in each.
Maybe that's the mark.
It's a good start anyway. Yeah,
Thanks.
it's a good idea. Okay, Councillor Gibbons next with a question.
Okay. What I was wondering, in relation to the changes of use and the categories, you know, the A1s, A2s and things, if we could have a list of what they all represent. And then, I'm not sure whether this overlaps with what Charles was saying, how many businesses we've got in each of one of those A1, A2, A3, A4, A5 uses for each of the towns. And then I would like to know how difficult it is to get a change of use and what's the average length of time to do that. Because moving forward, we might have to be fairly nippy if we want to regenerate the towns with different offers.
Okay. Don't know if would we hold a list of all of the different youth classes of premises in our borough. It might be something that we can.
Question for planning, I think.
Question for planning, yeah. Okay. I think it's a good idea. That would be a good. It's interesting. It would be interesting to see. I remember being sent something by Tim Kenny once that he had access to a system that did map different types of businesses in different areas, and it could tell whether they were hospitality, office, residential. Yes. So there must be a way of doing it somehow. If we could, even if we could.
So if you had your list A1, A2, what they were, how many of those businesses were in each of the 4 main towns, and if that was linked then to change of use, you would see the trend in a very good snapshot, wouldn't you? An Excel spreadsheet like that type of thing.
Okay, we'll try to look to something like that. I think that's a good idea for that 5th meeting. Okay. Any other questions, Lynn?
No, fine up to now. Yeah, fine.
Sam Naylor, sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I think whether there's any way of doing it, I mean, Steph can probably tell us, but I think it's worthwhile if we could do some kind of comparative analysis of the performance of our town centres and high streets against the performance of out of town shopping centres, like we've got one on Manchester Road in Northwich. And also, is there any way of kind of judging the kind of lower performance of town centres against any kind of increase in internet shopping? You know what I'm saying?
We can do it from a trend perspective. We can take that away and have a look at how easy or difficult it is to do.
Good.
Excellent. Right, I'm just conscious of time because we've obviously got a few presentations from our friends that have joined us. Charles, you've got your hand up again. Sam, Naylor, do you want to take your hand down? And Lynn, have you got your hand up again?
Oh no, not taking it down.
Okay, so we'll just take Charles's question. Oh, sorry, say again, Charles.
It was just say that the user data that you're referring to will be provided by Experian Goad. So that's what Tim Kenny will have sent you, and that's, for example, what I can access. Now, those are only likely to be produced for the big 4, but again, it has historic data. They go to every town and city centre at least once every 2 years. Some of them, possibly Chester, might be every year, and so that they will note down who the occupiers are and what the use is. So that can be very useful. Secondary, there was also a comment made about Sam Naylor made about the changes in relation to different types of town centre or out of town. I found some information. There's a producer called the Local Data Company, which the council may or may not already have a subscription with, but they produce reports and information. So there's some information I got yesterday, which I'll once I've gathered it together, I'll ping it into the commission. But it was quite useful in showing trends generally in terms of town centres, out of town, and those sort of bits through there. And then it was just again in relation to wards. Is I'm not necessarily saying that we need a breakdown of each and every single ward. I'm just saying that there seem to be about half a dozen wards that are missing from the statistics, and that will be useful information in terms of where are they going, where do these people go shopping. They're likely to go to one of the big 4, or Neston and Parkgate, Frodsham, Helsby and Tarpley, and we need to take those residents into account, because at the moment, as I say, my reading of it is that there's half a dozen wards that are not being included within the claim and count rates or the general health or the population statistics, which is, you know, we're aiming at this. It's people coming in to do the shopping, and the people who are most likely to do the shopping are the residents in our borough, and they're most likely to go to their local centre. So if we're missing wards out, we haven't got the full picture.
What I suggest then is if we go for a rest of the borough type indicator for now, Charles, would that be okay? I know it wouldn't be quite what you were asking for.
I mean, I just think if the team could have a look at the rationale of it, because, you know, for example, why is Sutton Villages included when, you know, Christleton and Huntingdon isn't? You know, that doesn't make any sense to me. Is that they're both on the outskirts of Chester, and
so you want them grouped in? Okay.
Well, you know, they should either both be in or they
point.
should both be out, and in which case they're both out. Where do they go? And it's sort of, if we can be consistent, I think what's happened is that somebody's had a look at it, they've pulled out what the relevant ones are, and then they've just left the other ones. And it's sort of, well, actually, what do we do with them? Do we do as you suggest? You know, we might have a rest of the borough. We might have a south quack, you know, which takes account of a number of those rural areas there. Or we might think, well, actually, that ward should be cobbled onto Chester. That one should go next to Tarpley. That one should go to Neston. That one should go to Ellesmere Port.
Okay.
And I would hope the localities team would probably, in each area, would know which of the retail centres those residents are more likely to go towards.
Charles, we will pick this up with the site and intelligence team, because the source of the data was I&I, so we will pick it up with them.
Brilliant.
Perfect. Thanks, Steph. Okie dokes. Shall we, if everybody's okay, then we'll bring a refreshed version of that to the next commission meeting, or circulate it in advance, and we'll move on to the next agenda item then, if that's okay. We're joined by our guests who are going to give us their kind of thoughts and opinions, and they're each going to do a short presentation or speak for a short time, and then we'll take questions at the end rather than interrupting, unless any of the speakers particular. Sam, have you got your hand up to ask a question, Sam Naylor? No. Unless any of the speakers indicate at the start that they just want to have a kind of discussion-based presentation, and then that's also fine as well. But we'll work on the assumption that it's a presentation and then questions at the end. Is there anybody who particularly wants to go first?
I'm happy to go first if.
I knew you'd say that, Una. Go on then, fire away.
So I think probably I'm going to share my screen with you, if that's okay. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about, for those of you that don't know what GFN is, so you get a sense of this organisation as I begin. And hopefully this, I'm going to start. Can you see that from the beginning? Can you see it?
Yeah, we can see. Yeah, we can see that.
Okay, so GFM, what is it? It is a global organisation with chapters all around the world that was set up by people who wanted to do good in the cities that they lived in. So there's groups in Singapore, there's ones in San Francisco, Sydney, London is where it all started out, Bristol, but Chester's actually the most active. We've got over 400 professional members who actively contribute to making a difference in the city of Chester. I've highlighted a few of the people on that screen there at our last event. You can see on there that there are some councillors who attended. And we also had one of the Pro-Vice Chancellors who's one of the hackers. The idea behind GFN is very simple. It's to make a difference. It's to take action and accelerate projects within the city of Chester. The projects that have made a difference in Chester that GFN have led on are Super Trees. They are Story House. The Hunger Games app was developed out of a hack. And our most recent projects over the last 18 months has been developing Good for Nothing X, GFNX, which is looking at how young people in the city of Chester, specifically at this point, engage and contribute to the city. We have a hashtag and it's called Make Chester. It's a collective and it belongs to everyone, people who want to make Chester. That does not mean that we're excluding the rest of Cheshire. We've worked in Ellesmere Port, we do a lot of work with different organisations. It just happens that we are GFN Chester. So you asked us about young people and engagement and why does it matter? Over the last 18 months, we've done some work with various organisations that have included looking at how young people access services within the city of Chester and looking at how they contribute to the developments within the city of Chester. And when we say young people, we're talking about from 0 to 25, okay? And when we're talking about young people even more specifically, we're looking at them as part of a family. We're then talking about those teenagers and then as young adults entering the workforce or moving to the city to engage in job prospects or in further and higher education. So we did 3 projects over the last 18 months, one of which was about D House, where we were commissioned by Andy Foster, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that. And we've asked questions about how, oh, this may not work because it's a PowerPoint. I might have to. I have some voices on here that may not work. But so basically, we asked a lot of young people different questions about what they thought about living in a historic city and what they felt that was missing and what they wanted. And you would not be surprised that they said similar things to what adults wanted. They want spaces where they feel that they are positively welcomed, and that's not always the case. They want things that are catering for their needs. One young person that we spoke to as part of a wider group talked about the reason why they all head to Ellesmere Port, Cheshire Oaks, was because they feel that that's a space that they're welcomed. There's bus networks that take them there, from there. And that's children who are living in the villages in the periphery, be it from Hellsby to Waverton, be it from Blake. And the collective voice was the reason they went to that place, Ellesmere Port, Cheshire Oaks, was because that's where they felt safest and they felt like they were the most welcomed, which was quite an interesting kind of perspective about considering we kind of thought that most of them might gravitate towards Chester in terms of the fact that the bus routes into it. One of the things that we've looked at is about how you engage in a connected city. Historically, young people have been born, they've stayed there, they've gone to school in the city, and then they've moved maybe once to go to university, and that's where they've stayed, or they return. Recently, all the evidence suggests that they move, and they move in beyond their locality. That might flip, in actual fact, given my other role at university, that might flip, as we all know, because of COVID at the moment. There might be a lot more young people staying at home than we expect. But the trend has been that they move away. But one of the things that people forget is this idea of community and young people and why they stay in their cities. And although there's a great number of young people who leave Chester and Cheshire, full stop, to go to other places for work and for study, there's a whole sect of young people who remain. And that came quite apparent about why people stayed. And it was one, because of their circumstances and they didn't feel they had the skills to be able to move away, or because of the fact that they just wanted to stay. It was that security blanket. But the sense of community was vital for all young people. And when you look at the stats about where growing cities are happening, Liverpool and Manchester outperform us because they're building cities and town centres that meet the needs of young people and are creating job opportunities and attracting businesses that will employ young people in those organisations. So if those young people are going away and they're moving to Liverpool and Manchester, we're always going to be left with a group of young people who don't go away and who will become, Steph and I spoke a bit of this about another project, whereby they will become the disengaged adults, the reluctant users of library services, and they might become the reluctant residents as they progress into middle age and older generations. So we've got to find ways to make these young people stay and actively contribute for our sake and for the wider vitality of our communities and town centres. So if you look, BBC, I'm not reinventing the wheel with this, BBC Newsbeat did a huge survey nationally. You can go on and have a look at it. And it talked about where you should live if you're a young person. If you just take a look at some of the data on this, these came out of things that young people seem to value. So mental health care. We score, as you can see, Cheshire West quite highly on that, which I think is brilliant. I was surprised at the Wild Land. We scored 1. I was quite taken aback by that. In comparison, Cheshire East scored 1 for bus services. And when you talk to the young people that we've engaged with over the last 18 months, and which probably equates now to about 200 to 300 young people, bus services are key. It's really apparent that they need that connectivity within the place that they live and being able to get around safely. If you look at the stats between our local rivals, which is, I would say, we're comparative. Comparisons are between Warrington is very similar, but if you look at somewhere like Liverpool, they're scoring an average of 7. And Manchester scores 6 on this. If you take some, you can actually analyse this data and you can go on and have a play and say what things you prioritise in terms of employment, 4G, youth population. If you put those 3 in and it suggests where's the best place for you to live, and Liverpool comes out top. And therefore it's no surprise that those are the 2 fastest growing cities because of the way they're catering for young people's needs. So this is some of the thoughts. I'm going to just play you this. If you could let me know if you can't hear this. We asked young people at 3 high schools as we were developing the GFNX programme, which is all about getting young people to contribute to the future of the city. And we asked them what were their priorities. And these 4 things really did come out. Their careers and job opportunities, spaces that they felt safe in and also that they were welcome to. They were very social aware and they wanted leisure activities that were designed for them, not seen as an add-on. So I'm going to let you hear from some of the young people we've spoken to.
Una, I can't hear anything.
Can you not hear anything?
No.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure. I'm not a tech whiz on this. This happened to me when I did something the other day and it seemed to work fine. But hold on, I'm just going to stop presenting for a sec and I'm going to try, because I think it's quite important that you hear from them. Present.
If you try playing it with your speakers up loud, hopefully it'll go.
Yeah, they are loud. I think it's to do, there's a weird anomaly. I think it's something to do with this. Came out when I did something and I can't remember what it was that you had to click. Let me just see. Apologies for that.
Una, did you mute your microphone?
No, no. It's I think it might just be that sometimes I don't know if anybody's a tech whiz, but last time apparently it was something I clicked and it made it work straight away, which would be amazing. I wonder. Hold on, let me just try view.
When you click share, there should be an option to say include system audio at the top of the clip.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. Do you
It should just be when you click share.
I think you'll have to unshare and then share again, Una.
That's it. Yeah.
Okay. Right. If am I unsharing right now?
No. Now share again, and it'll be an option when you click on share.
Has that worked? Let's just see. Can you hear her now?
No.
No. I'm going to tell you what she says. So Holly, so we surveyed and spoke with young people, and I'll send this presentation so you can look at it yourselves. But Holly's 7, and she was the youngest participant we did in a primary school as part of one of the projects, and she said she wanted a place where there was hotels. Now I was quite taken aback by the idea that a 7-year-old wanted there to be a place for hotels, and I asked her to elaborate on this, and she says, well, hotels bring people, and people mean that they spend money in the cities, which means that they pay for things that make our city better. Now that's somebody who's 7 years of age, and where she's got that from I thought was quite powerful, because she recognised that we need growth within the city. But on the flip side of that, we also spoke to a 23-year-old who'd moved to the city for work, and the reason she picked Chester to move to was because she valued the locality and the fact that she could walk and cycle, she could shop locally, and that she felt safe of an evening, and that there was affordable housing, and there were things that she could get involved within her city and make an active contribution. She sat on the Young Marketeers programme at Story House. And that's how we got speaking to her. And what we're seeing from this is the other side of this is about this socially aware. They care about the issues within the city. They care about the fact that a lot of them felt very anti the Northgate development. They couldn't see the value of it because they said, well, we've got Cheshire Oaks, you've got Broughton. They see that as being a barrier to them. They felt that one of the things that was missing was the opportunity for them to have affordable housing, apartments, and to reimagine how they might live in the city, but also alongside of that about how business were attracted to the city. And that pans out from if you were a 12-year-old talking to us about their employment opportunities and work experience opportunities. And the spaces that they used. We spoke to about 40, we did a workshop with 40 young people from Blaken High School. And some of the feedback from that in itself was fascinating because they have an amazing youth club down at Blaken. But the commentary on that was, we don't want to go there. That's for young kids. When people say we want spaces, we want places that are designed for us, and that's in the city. We want to be heard and felt like we're welcomed into places. And we said, well, what does that look like? I said, it doesn't have to look like anything, but it needs to be for us. So that window of young people who are 14 to 16 are at a really big turning point in how they're seeing their future engagement within the city. And if you don't kind of capture them now, they will go away and they'll stay away and they'll make a difference to places like Liverpool, Manchester, London, Bristol, etc. So it's finding opportunities that gives them valuable work experience opportunities and attracts businesses and gives them opportunities to engage with those businesses and initiatives within the city. And this bore out quite clearly when we did a D House project with Caroline and Andy Foster, etc. last year. With D House, and during that project it was asking them to consider whether or not young people understood that they lived in a heritage city, and we spoke with 66 to 9-year-olds, we spoke to 18, 13, 14-year-olds, and we spoke to 15 university students, and we did that through a range of initiatives. We did a creative workshop with the primary school age pupils. We did a workshop looking at kind of debating strategies with the teenagers, and then we did a discussion session with the university students. Key messages that came out were that most people did not know that they lived in a heritage city. A lot of them had no knowledge of D House, and a significant, but when we did the workshop, when we explored what it meant to live in a heritage city, they grasped it, they got it, because they felt like they understood what was hanging in the balance. And that was really interesting to hear. Some of them wanted it to be a museum, but some of them felt that we could reimagine some of our buildings and that we needed to look beyond reading between this, the commercial viability of projects, and that seemed to be too much on the agenda. That bore out with our 13 to 14-year-olds. They didn't, again, pre-discussion, what's a heritage city? There's nothing to do in Chester if you're a teenager. What is D-House? So things that these were their thoughts before we did this kind of discussion, debate, task. Big things, these are the big themes that came out of this, were about a need to tackle the homelessness issue. They felt that adults were ignoring that. They felt that the D-House should be saved and the other heritage spaces should be valued more. A key thing that fell out of this also was about car parking spaces, the age-old battle of car parking spaces. They said that's the thing that makes their parents angry and stops them from coming into Chester, but they didn't have the same beliefs as them. There was a real sense of urgency with regards to the climate crisis, and that they felt that the council were right to put the climate crisis on the agenda, and that we should be standing up for more environmentally friendly approaches to building and sustainability. One of the university students who was very active in the discussion talked about a need for the council to take note, and they said one of our big issues, and if I could play her voice, it would be very powerful for you to listen to, talks about a need for councils to stop talking about what young people want and start co-creating with young people. And for us in JFN, that's the pivotal. It's about not telling you what young people think. It's about listening to them and giving them the platform to be able to contribute to the future of the city. Far too long, these are the 23-year-olds, said that, you know, the council needs to take action and recognise that you're not just protecting it for the next generation, you're protecting it for the 10, 15 generations that come, and that there needs to be different ways to find the opportunities and create the time and space to do things differently that allow young people to engage with the future developments of the city. So we've done lots of this. I'm going to stop sharing now. I think that's enough of that. We've done lots of engagement, as you can see, with young people about the challenges. This is based on our historic work about how we're working with Chester Zoo to look at environmental issues with young people and how we engage young people across the city and making those connections. We've done work with Richard and looking at the active travel agenda. And there's a huge number of young people in this city who want to contribute, but they may not do it through the normal channels. We have a youth parliament, which is very active, but the thing that I would say you need to bear in mind is that is one type of young person. And for us, those are probably most likely motivated young people who would become involved with most things. What we've got to do is find ways to engage with the young people who are hard to reach or who don't know what they don't know yet, and make it that they should contribute and they want to contribute to the growth and development of our towns. So that's our perspective, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, actually, I was just thinking, I've been reading this report. I don't know if you've come across it, this Grimsby review report, and it says in it that you know, we've got to get children involved in planning, and we've got to, you know, young people involved in planning and in participation about town centres. And I'm just conscious of time, and I'm just wondering if everybody else agrees with this, whether it's worth bringing Emma in now to talk about what Action Transport Theatre have been doing in Ellesmere Port, and then to bring in Gareth, because he runs a youth and community centre in Neston. And then if they do their, I know we've got Cornell as well. Maybe if we could do all of those presentations and have people speak first, and then try and leave half an hour for a good discussion at the end. Does the rest of the committee agree with doing it that way?
I agree with
think it's a good idea.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right, let's go for that then. So Emma, if you want to go first, and then I think we'll go to Gareth, and then Cornell, if you can kind of summarise what everybody else has said from your perspective, and then we'll go straight into a longer discussion amongst us all, where we can ask different questions of different members of the public that have come to give us evidence. Is that all right? Good stuff. Emma.
Okay, hi. I don't have a presentation, I'm afraid, like Una's beautiful one. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of Action Transport Theatre's experiences in Ellesmere Port. It was really interesting actually to see the vacancy rate in Ellesmere Port, because I thought it would show as being much higher than that, because if you walk around Ellesmere Port town centre, it certainly feels that there's a lot more shops and units empty than that figure would suggest. And really our experience of working in Ellesmere Port stems from that. We are having to move out of Whitby Hall, our home, because it is finally going to get a roof that doesn't leak, and also hopefully a new wonderful studio theatre. And as a consequence of that, we were wanting to take our cultural activity into the centre of town and use vacant spaces in town to run family cinema clubs, which are free, which we've been running in Whitby Hall, all our drama activities, to have creative activities happening around the city centre. That was impossible for us to do because it was not possible for us to find a unit that we could have for a peppercorn rent effectively, because we don't have the funds to pay for rent. That's not what we have, but we can contribute a lot towards the city centre in terms of animating it, drawing people in, because there's something to go and see as opposed to shops. And nothing I'm going to say, I'm afraid, is going to be about increasing necessarily directly shops being in the city centre. But I think we really need to rethink what the city centres are for. And I'm not saying anything different here than we're all hearing all the time. And things like the Grimsey report are saying is that people need to be attracted to city centres to dwell and linger rather than simply to park, pay and drive away. Now, if that's not going to help us make money in inverted commas, why should we bother doing it? Well, I fundamentally believe, and part of our ethos at Action Transport Theatre is that city centres or district centres, which is what Ellesmere Port is, provide a strong community environment and are absolutely pivotal in contributing to community welfare and well-being. So although people may not need those environments in order to shop anymore, they do need those environments in order to become a community. And particularly, as Una's pointed out, young people often want town centres in order to become a community and to learn how to interact as people together. And part of that, especially for young people, but for all generations, is to have some sort of cultural activity. Not everybody wants to go to a bar, not everybody wants to go shopping, but to have cultural excitement in a town centre. And I'm not talking Royal Shakespeare here. It might be art, it might be street performances, it might be somewhere where you can go to the cinema, maybe not your traditional view cinema, but it might be a little bit more fun and quirky, whereby your town centre becomes somewhere where you want to go and spend your leisure time. Just being is really, really important. And I think we need to think about how residential areas interact with that space of being and community actualisation. So a bit like what Una was saying about buses, how do the new urban areas that we are creating, vast housing estates in places like Rossmore and on the edges of Chester as well, on the way out to Wales, how are those residential areas connecting to the town centre? They're only a couple of miles away, but are we just creating residential ghettos that cannot connect to the town centre? And secondly, on that point, we definitely should be looking at how people can live in the town centre. Ellesmere Port quite evidently has much more commercial space than it is ever going to use. But we can't just say, let's convert all these old offices or shops into flats, because people don't live in a building, they live in a place. And they need a place to be somewhere they want to be. And when they walk out of their front door, there's a green space that they can go into, because undoubtedly they won't have a garden with a flat. There's a playground that they can take their children to that they don't have to get in a car and drive to. So it's very important that we diversify what we think of as our town centres. And I know the question always comes, well, how will that be paid for if we've not got as many shops? I suppose I have the luxury of not being my problem necessarily to solve. But what I do know is we won't have town centres unless we do diversify, because none of us can pretend that shops are going to be the saviour of town centres. So I think in summary, our experience is that we've got to find better ways of bringing experimental, diverse, engaging, broad age spectrum of cultural experiences and experiences of self-expression into town centres as one element of making town centres and district centres somewhere I want to live, rather than being somewhere I have to get in the car to go, and I drive there and I park and I pay and I go again, because that is not a sustainable solution from where we are today. It can't rely on people working in town centres, as we've talked at the beginning. It has to be somewhere I want to go, not somewhere I have to go. And I think that sums up what I think about town centres, is that they have to be somewhere I want to go, not that I have to go, for any age group. And that's a lot shorter than Una, but there we go. That's it, Richard.
That was very useful. Thank you, Emma. We will ask you some questions in a second. If you move straight on to Gareth, we're doing it better for time now. So thank you, Emma.
Hi, yeah, I have got a presentation, but somebody else has got it. And I can't share my screen at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's probably Beth that's got it. Beth,
Yeah.
can you help us out?
I've got it here, so if you want to just let me share my screen, I can do it if you want me to.
It's all right, you're up.
Thank you. Okay, so I was asked to not specifically talk about what we do or what we're thinking more broadly, really, which makes me a bit nervous in that I'm representing potentially areas that I don't know as much about. What I do know is that while agreeing with pretty much everything that the previous two have said, I suppose outside of the creative things, I think the driver for social and economic development, and particularly in market towns. One of the things that's been mentioned is around transport and public transport, particularly for young people. I think public transport's crucial across ages, and certainly our experience is that public transport links here are woefully inadequate, which means that lots of our young people are kind of stuck here. They're not able to go to the cinema, they're not able to go, certainly not past 4 o'clock, because the last bus that comes back is about 5 o'clock. They're not able to access other things, and when they are, it's a long journey. You know, to get to Ellesmere Port, which is part of Neston and Ellesmere Port, is potentially an hour's bus journey, which is a 15-20 minute drive. High streets are either stagnant or failing in lots of ways, but they're also full of potential. Lots of towns are facing hidden health and social issues. People look at Neston and see it as a very kind of green and leafy place with nice cars and driveways and semi-detached houses. Behind all of that are lots of other stories. There is either a real or perceived disparity in either investment or investment priority. And the old economics of high streets aren't working. So while people complain that there isn't shops anymore, the reason there isn't shops anymore is because they stopped shopping in them and went to the supermarket instead. So all of that has to be challenged. The potential, though, is that there's more direct link between local businesses and employers and residents. We know lots of the people who run our shops in our town centre. They are our neighbours and our friends and people that we associate with. There is a range of physical assets available to us that can be diversified, repurposed, reused. There is the potential to use creative cultural organisations to drive footfall and dwell time and keep things happening, which is pretty much what I think Emma's saying and pretty much what Una's saying as well. Community anchor organisations that already exist in towns are already connected to people, to businesses and to statutory bodies. In terms of community businesses, which a lot of them anchor organisations are, there are now 9,000 community businesses in England. About a third of them are hubs and village halls, which is one of the things that we do. They are improving health and well-being as their biggest impact. And although they are more located in more deprived areas, certainly for Neston, that's not necessarily the case, but they do work in collaborative relationships across sectors with businesses, with the local authorities. 6,325 community-owned assets, turning over nearly £1 billion a year. And they support sustainability. The truth is that we couldn't do many of the things that we do without our building as a base. But we also recognise that it's the building itself is not the be-all and end-all. And in fact, our future 5-year strategy is actually entitled Beyond These Four Walls, because we recognise that actually we need to get outside of that building to influence the things that we want to influence. There are a lot of people, 34,000 staff, 200,000 volunteers. The average is 15 staff to 30 volunteers. We've currently got 6 staff, 2 of them are part-time, and we've got 180 volunteers registered, who some of them will volunteer once or twice a year. Some of them volunteer on a daily or weekly basis. Average income about £140,000. Interestingly, the majority of that comes from trading. It doesn't come from grants. It doesn't come from money that's handed to organisations. It's money that they earn, and that can be through any number of things. We have a building that we hire out, but we also run some contracts. We work with primary care. We work with the local authority. That revenue and that generated income is crucial, again, to allow the flexibility to actually do what needs to be done. It's never kind of been more clear than it was during the current health crisis, where we were able to just switch what we were doing because the money is ours, we've earned it, and we can choose how to spend it. Because we've got a business base, we can choose how to operate that, and we can choose how to do things. In terms of turning potential into reality, there is a huge body of policy campaigns going on nationally and locally. Keep it local is not new. It's an ongoing thing. Community wealth building, the same. Community-led homes, which goes back to the kind of disparity thing in Neston. Residents receive a lower rate of housing benefit because of a historical glitch in the political systems. House prices are more expensive. There are less and less or very few available single-bedroomed accommodation, which means that lots of young people have to move out. That impacts the high street. That impacts where people are spending their money. Saving spaces in terms of saving public spaces. There's a massive sell-off of public spaces and public buildings all over the country in order to enable local authorities to balance their books. But actually, it's the false economy. You get a short-term financial hit and financial input without any long-term benefits. The more recent one is we were built for this, and I'm going to leave you with the 3 asks from that really, which is that local authorities and government support community-powered economic recovery, that we create collaborative public services that unlock power of community, and that we turn community spirit into community power and community action. And I'm done.
Hi, that was brilliant. Thank you very much, Gareth. Particularly the bit about the money and the community use and the money that comes in. I had no idea £1 billion. That's really impressive. And that division between rural and urban areas as well, found that really interesting as well. So, okay.
That £1 billion isn't in Neston, you know that, don't you?
Is it in Cheshire at Highland Kent? That'd be good. Cornell, you're the access officer for the council. So I think have you got any slides to show, or are you just going to talk generally? And I'm just wondering if it would be great if you're able to. I'm asking you to do this off the cuff, which is a bit harsh because you've not had a chance to prepare. But if you could think about what the other speakers have said and just give us your interpretation about the different ideas that they've had and how that impacts on access and things like that, that would be useful too.
Yeah, I can look I can look at those things. So I've come at this from a slightly different angle. Let me get my sharing sorted. Bear with me. So there we are. So I'm coming at this from a slightly different angle. So I'm looking at this. I think a lot of the ideas that have been said have obviously been fantastic ideas of sort of rethinking what is going to draw people into a town centre, what's going to do these sorts of things. And what I've gone for in this is more of sort of how's that going to be inclusive for everybody. So there's ways of doing the things that have been talked about and making it a community hub as well as shopping and various other things. A place to indulge in culture, if you will, and have that community spirit, and to encourage people to come to the town centres. But with that community, it's ensuring that nobody's left behind, I think. Looking at this, just looking at some of the reasons for access and some of the resources that the council have at their disposal to help achieve this, and some general ideas for towns and city centres going through this. So obviously we'll take some questions afterwards, but I'll just go through this and explain what I've got here. So first of all, some of these reasons are pretty self-explanatory. So looking at the future for accessible, inclusive towns and city centres. First of all, as a council, we are bound by the public sector equality duty. So this is a legal obligation under the Equality Act 2010. We're the council, we're a public body, and therefore we have an anticipatory duty above and beyond that of organisations to promote equality and the opportunity for people with protected characteristics. So in this case, I'm looking at disabled people. Failure to do so can lead to potential claims of discrimination. So that's reputational damage, that can be financial damage, etc. It's pretty much self-explanatory. I think having Cheshire, West and Chester as sort of a flagship borough for accessibility and inclusion can be really helpful. When you look at recognition from the borough in 2017, Chester was awarded the European Union Accessible City Award, and this elevated the borough on a global stage for access and inclusion. So I know, me personally, in my inbox, I've received requests from authorities around the globe asking for advice on how this was achieved and how that it's become known in their places, and how actually their tourism offices have advertised Chester in this way, and people have visited on the back of that, and that's been global. So that's been encouraging. Another thing, I firmly believe 100% of people will benefit from accessible and inclusive initiatives. So that's whether it's directly, indirectly, disabled people. So there's 14 million disabled people in the UK, and we'd want the towns and cities in Chester to be a place where they are not only welcome, but encouraged to come in, to spend money, to visit, and to increase reputation there again. And anybody can benefit from an access initiative. So people who are injured temporarily might be using things that people who have been disabled all their life are using, and may not realise how much benefit that is to certain people. And also family members and friends as well, with some of the older communities that live in the borough can benefit from accessible centres. That includes the built environment, that includes transport and things like that, which I'll touch on in a second. And also I think that with access and inclusion, these can be powerful combinations with other important innovations and regenerative initiatives. So access and inclusion actually goes hand in hand with other priorities, with carbon reduction, transport restructure, and a lot of the COVID recovery plans. So that's a general overview of the reasons for accessibility and inclusivity. They're not an exhaustive list. I know there are many more here, but these are some of the ones which I've highlighted. So first of all, I think it's important from a council point of view to look at it from before anything happens, obviously. So the design stage and before that. So accessible and inclusive planning and preparation. So first thing, which I think is most important, is engagement and outreach to these communities and to these groups who would benefit the most from access. The best people to know about access are the impacted communities themselves. So engagement through this process with CDAF, Corporate Disability Access Forum, which I'll touch on, as well as DIAL, the West Cheshire Access Group and others, I think is absolutely vital. And that goes for a lot of the other engagement groups that we've talked about with young persons charities and groups and community groups that can have their input on it. And that's the same for access, of course. And then communication. So one thing we've learned particularly from the COVID outbreak and the recovery things which have happened, any proposed changes, temporary or permanent, should be communicated with availability and accessible formats to impacted groups. So that's location of signage and policy for social distancing, some things for people with sensory impairments, so some people cannot see the information, and don't underestimate the amount of planning that some disabled people go into before they visit either a new place or even a local place. And if something in the environment or the policy has changed there, that can be a really fearful and scary experience and put somebody off visiting for life sometimes. So that communication of information of any change, big or small, is key in advance. And I think timing of stakeholder involvement is important on that as well. So relevant stakeholders, such as the affirmation groups or myself or any other access group, should be involved at consultation and design stage and throughout when you're thinking of what to do with these city centres and when the plans are drawn up as well. And again, that goes hand in hand with the representation, access and inclusion, representation on boards and planning committees within the council itself. And then access training for town and city centre planners. So this provides construction professionals, planners, etc., with basic understanding of legislation, regulation, and principles of accessible and inclusive design. That's in addition to obviously the resources that we have at our disposal for specialist access consultation. And again, with a strategic vision, so a vision for towns and centres, not only encompassing access consideration, but with it being developed in conjunction with, at the heart of all these other priorities from the beginning. So, as I mentioned, I said I'd talk a little about the Corporate Disability Access Forum. It's a forum which I run. It's a forum which the Cabinet Member for Adult Health and Social Care, Belle Armstrong, chairs. Councillor Fieffield is the Vice Chair. And it's a council-run, wide-reaching forum. It's formed of internal elected members, officers, and external stakeholders and access groups. It's an excellent wide breadth of knowledge and interests. And it's a vital source for consultation and accountability. So the forum's provided excellent responses, including for this commission, as well as for Active Transport Commission and for COVID-19 recovery policies, which I fed back on their behalf. And it's a diverse forum with the capability of wide distribution of information as well. So anything that comes down from the council, from elected members and from briefings can be spread out far and wide to impacted communities, disabled communities and access groups. And it's a united but diverse forum. So CDEF can provide united recommendations on projects as well that can be voted on. We have the various mechanisms in place with our terms of reference, such as, and this has happened. So we've had tactile and sensory diverse wayfinding recommendations for the Northgate project in Chester, as well as diverse views, individual views where people are free to express them outside of the forum. So looking at a few of the specifics of this, visions of accessibility and inclusion, transportation. So looking at cars and private transportation, I know we're trying to move away from the park and pay and leave type of things, which obviously is important in line with the climate initiatives. But still, as it stands, as a statutory minimum allocation of 6% of total council allocated spaces should be accessible blue badge spaces, and more than this is encouraged. And these should be best practice to close the spaces to key locations in towns and city centres. And that can be hand in hand sometimes with disabled and blue badge only routes. I know a lot have been closed off in the wake of COVID-19, but having actually dedicated blue badge only routes, this can lead to accessible spaces, reduce congestion by closing off other roads to general traffic flow, and allowing access for those who need it most. So it's a priority space, priority roadway and space for them. And dedicated drop-off and pick-up routes and places for private vehicles and taxis, many of whom have contracts either with the council or with disability organisations themselves. And that's similar with public transportation, something which I'd like to push and have the infrastructure even better has been mentioned, not just into Chester, but into the smaller towns where the last bus might be at 5 o'clock and various young people or disabled people that can't drive, or people might be trapped or might be really time bound by their time in these towns and city centres. And it'd be good to look at expansion of this, like Plus Bus in Chester, dedicated concessionary bus services from bus stations to and around the key locations, such as shop mobility and retail hubs and cultural hubs and places that people want to go. And again, this follows on with accessible protocols and recommendations for council contracted taxi companies. Protocols would ensure consistency among providers. This means that disabled people could book these with confidence, and this information should be communicated widely. We have had experiences of some disabled people booking inaccessible transportation and not knowing which companies were accessible, which were not, and having that information distributed widely would be key. And again, accessible rail links, so closer liaison with rail providers and their equality boards, with clear accessible wayfinding and transportation from stations to central areas. I'm privileged enough to be on the board for the Avanti Accessibility Board, and there's a lot of talk going on about this at the moment of how they can make it better from their northwest lines to get into the towns and city centres in accessible and sustainable ways. So active transportation, we look at the carbon and congestion cutting initiatives, walking and cycling. I think equality of representation for walking, cycling and disability access groups. So the benefits of cycling, they're well documented, and provisions are rightfully being made for this increase, absolutely. There's a balance to be made, I think, here. They should not be at the detriment of walking or other access groups. Some cycling provision, if unchecked and just left to go can directly adversely impact disabled people if not implemented with careful consideration. And that's come from a number of access groups that have been lobbying me to mention this. Cycling simply won't be possible for some disabled people. Alternatives for disabled people must be considered, with safety, wellbeing, and inclusion also being considered when implementing cycling provision. And walking and pedestrian routes must be accessible and inclusive as well. So walking can include ambulant disabled people. They might require regular rest areas, such as dedicated bench seating. Wheelchair users who require walking routes where two wheelchair users can pass each other effectively and safely. And other disabled people who might require tactile pavements and other alternative accessible wayfinding information. And this goes hand in hand with shared spaces. I think they're hugely beneficial if managed properly. Large shared spaces allow disabled people, they might require extra room to move freely, and they have that room in shared spaces. Appropriate management of this would be tactile and colour differentiated surfaces, dedicated pedestrian only and cycleway guides, and enforced speed limits for motorised vehicles. And hand in hand with this is risk management for disabled people, particularly with those with mobility or sensory aids is important in this case. And then looking at the built environment, navigation of central areas, uninhibited access in main central areas, so the removal of A-board signage and other obstacles, which has happened in Chester, which was an excellent move, welcomed unanimously by access groups, with well-managed al fresco facilities clearly marked and differentiated from the main passageways. Level access where possible, so the removal of any unnecessary steps and alternatives provided where necessary. Maintenance of historic pavements is key in a lot of towns and cities in the borough because of the historical nature of it, so the balance of historical conservation and safe access is a key priority. So very small things like ensuring loose pavement surfaces are maintained and fixed quickly. Accessible wayfinding, tactile maps and information boards like exist in Chester bus station. The tactile map there is excellent, and it's got potential for audio described information at certain points designed to integrate with hearing loop systems. So as people walk by, they can tune into information even if they can't see it. And council staff to assist with access. So building on the community guardian scheme implemented in the COVID-19 recovery plans, I know that's been a success in Ellesmere Port particularly. And multiple access routes to historical conservation sites such as the Chester Walls and Rows, which are not time restricted. So non-invasive work to ensure more of these areas can be accessed by people at all times. That's through route planning, access audit and consultancy in cooperation with businesses. Part of that would be an improvement. Part of that would be so we don't face embarrassment again by people that have been stuck on the rows, for example, in the past, because a business has shut early, for example, and that's the only way they've been able to get up to the high levels on the roads if they were wheelchair users. And finally, looking at visions for accessibility and inclusion with policy. So internal policy, it'd be great to see at least one person who's undergone access training to be on committees for town and city centre planning. So it's not just sharing plans for consultation, but there's an influencer at the very heart and the beginning of the process. At least there's consideration for it in the planning stage of these things. Access training for enforcement officers goes hand in hand with that. So particularly regarding locations of blue badge parking and the regulations surrounding them, what can and can't people do is not always clear on signage. So enforcement officers having that training would improve, I think, a lot of the response that we've had from that. And access consideration written into planning decisions for making for town and city centre projects. Certain number of businesses having accessible toilets, premises meeting approved document M standards, and disability confident leader organisations being preferred when it comes to planning applications, acceptance or not. And then, of course, there's the accessible wayfinding, which I've touched on, so addition of tactical maps, information boards with that audio description potential. And then external policy, looking out and about with the business, so engagement with businesses, that will include a lot of the community organisations that we've heard of as well, what people would want, so looking at intersectionality with different groups that might be underrepresented in the creation of town centres and city centres and this regeneration. So looking at some of these businesses, private sectors do not have the same level of duty as public sector bodies, but they should be encouraged as best practice to meet these duties so the council and the businesses within it are consistent with their approach to accessibility in the centres. And this again looks like working with partnership with business bodies. So great relationships can be forged with local chambers of commerce, and this can be with view to something like a charter for inclusive growth, a covenant where businesses and bodies can sign up for actions on access, inclusion and business growth, and encouragement for businesses to achieve disability confident accreditation from partnerships with the Chamber of Commerce and with the council as well. So I've covered most of the things which I was going to talk about. Like I said, it's more of a general overview of what would be great to see whilst looking at these excellent innovations and liaison with community groups and working at the start with what communities want to see. I think the same goes for access throughout all levels of external liaison and internal council workings from planning all the way to building and design and transport. So that's everything from me, I think, and obviously I welcome questions as well.
Thank you very much indeed. That was really, really thorough and quite a lot to think about. If we want to stop sharing the screen now, if that would be okay.
Yeah.
And
how do you stop sharing?
Oh, it's a
little
X
button at the bottom.
On your pad. It should have a little in the middle of the dashboard next over a rectangle.
No, it doesn't have that on mine.
Okay, if
I can do it for you. I've done it.
There we go. There we go. Thank you. Sorry about that.
That's all right. Don't worry. Okay. So we've got a couple of hands up. I think we've got half an hour. I'm happy to extend it by 5-10 minutes if we're in the flow of questions, and that's okay with everybody else. I suppose we can question the whole panel. So if you've got a question that's going to be addressed to a couple of people, maybe just highlight who it is that you'd like to ask them to. Probably won't ask other panel members to come in just because I'm really conscious of time and I want to make sure that each member of the commission gets an opportunity to ask at least one question. So I'll start at the top of the list, which is Councillor Edwards, and we'll just fire away. Off we go. Councillor Edwards.
Hi, thank you. My question was originally for Una, but I think it sort of leads into some of the other presentations as well. I thought they were all excellent. This is an area I'm really interested in because I work in the third sector myself, and I'm very, very much into community cohesion. And having recently opened a youth club as well within the ward, and so it's great to hear all about the youth engagement and what they'd like to see in the cities and towns. But you mentioned that we're less attractive than Liverpool and Manchester, and I just wanted to know your thoughts about why. Obviously, we've heard the young people's thoughts, but it would be really good to know why you think we're not as attractive.
Well, there's twofold. I think part of it is we did a consultation with 15-year-olds, asking them about where they saw themselves in 5 years, and it was really interesting listening to them talk about cities and their career prospects and what have you. And there was a feeling that they'd outgrown Chester and that they could get more from a bigger city, and also that they had experienced everything that Chester had to offer, which I thought was quite surprising, because when you look at what facilities are available for them, it's very limited. So they then look at somewhere like Manchester, take for example, there's countless things that you can engage with in terms of the evening economy. Our evening economy is very weak if you're not a drinker, and a lot of young people aren't drinkers. In terms of experiences that they can engage with, they're catering. There's like-minded communities. We were asked to go and do a talk, GFN, a Pechacucha, which is kind of a series of talks, evening talks on a theme. And we went and talked about change makers and how you make a change. And we sat in a room, and there was about 150 people in a room, and they sell out these talks everywhere. And you just looked around and you went, these people have found each other. And GFN is a bit like that in the city of Chester, is people, and we've got members from 18 to 80. It's not about an age thing. It's that you find your people. And I think in Manchester and Liverpool and bigger cities, there's more opportunity to do that. And I think the risk that we have is, yes, you have to say, let them go, and they need to. And actually, sometimes if you think about it from an organisational point of view, you want people to leave and then come back and bring those ideas back. That's how we get development and we don't stagnate. But on the flip side of that, we then need to attract people to come to the city. And Emma and I and Richard have spoken about this previously. Andy Foster mentioned this. You've got to find a hook. You've got to find ways. If you look at commercial only as a driving force, you miss the incubator ideas. You miss the fact that places like Stoke, if you look at Stoke as a model, they turned a whole set of mills into studios. and they reduced the rent, and they said, you know, we're going to charge you nominal, we'll give you mentorship, which is part of the GFNX model about mentoring people. And they attracted artists and creatives. We need to find something that attracts people to the city. And I think we do. I think when we spoke to the 20 to 23-year-old range, there's a thing about safety. There's a thing about being able to shop locally. You can walk to work. You can cycle to work. You can be a part of the city life. But I don't think that that's big enough.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
That was really interesting. Okay, Charles, I think you're next in the list, if you'd like to go next.
Actually, can I wait to the end? Because the delivery driver's just arrived outside my door.
Of course you can, mate. Absolutely fine.
I am listening.
That's the interesting thing about attending these meetings online, isn't it? All the stuff that goes on around you while you're doing them. Councillor Gibbon, you're next on the list if you want to go next, and I'll come back to Charles.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I'm going to have to leave at 5:45 as well, because I've got another meeting starting at 6, which goes on till 8.
Oh yeah, that's fine.
Really,
you definitely need a break.
Yeah. My question is, I'm really interested in the stuff that Una had to say, and the other next lady, was it Emma, on relation to, you know, keeping people here and what they want to do, and how you develop the communities. My question is, how do you get over apathy? Having run a community group since 2006, I find there's lots of people want to get involved initially, but then it trails off, and keeping those people involved I found to be very difficult. And in actual fact, I'm just standing down from a community group, the community group now. So I'd be interested to know how we get over apathy in relation to community and getting them involved.
So I can tell you purely on a GFN. So Richard knows that we take our role as Good for Nothing very seriously, because and the reason people give their time and they're committed to it is because the projects that we engage with, we could do a project every week, but we have quite a strict criteria, and we talk quite a lot about which projects we help support. And the idea is that it has to be valued. So, for example, the Super Trees project that Steve came to us with, he had this idea, and it was a £7,000 project. And as you all know, it's turned into these 3 magnificent, love them or loathe them. I'm not interested. I'll declare my love for them right now, as I'm part of Forest. You know, it's about the impact. And for us, why people give their time, it's because they can see the impact. What we find is when people have got frustrated is when you give up your time and you sit in meetings like this or others and you go, well, nobody listened to us. And Richard, I could go on about something that I won't go on about, you know, that sometimes historically, I think that's where the council have got it massively wrong, is they haven't actually taken on board. They've paid lip service to consultation. They haven't actually understood what it means to co-construct projects. I think Emma has a lot of experience in this in terms of her work with Action Transport. But for us, it's that, you know, if you're committing to this, your work and your expertise is being taken seriously. We also incentivise, we get sponsors. So we've got about 30 different people who sponsor us through different projects. The whole idea of it is that we feed you. So if you come and do a project with us, the last project we did for the council, if they'd had to pay for that, the services that came out of it probably would have equated to about 7,500 in professional fees. But everybody gives their time. If it's a face-to-face hack, we usually get somebody to sponsor feeding us, bring pizzas, beers. You don't have to drink. You know, but it's about rewarding people and them feeling part of a community.
Sorry, what I was going to say as well is I think, you know, Una's people that she's managed to find, the 400 of them, that they're great, and they're people who have learnt how to be active community members. I think we have to have reasonable expectations about where a lot of people are in their understanding of the role in community and community development. So it's a journey to move from being a passive observer up to being somebody like Una, who's a member of about 250 different organisations. So I think what we have to do is say, how are we going to take people from a journey to being passive observers to being really motivated. Now, not all of them will go on that journey, not all of them will want to, not all of them are capable necessarily of doing that because of personal constraints. But it is interesting what we almost expect our communities and people to go from nothing to 100%. And as a society, I think we have to relearn about contributing to our local community and what we get out of that and what we give. So, for example, we are running a programme over the summer in some of the most deprived, over the next year in the most deprived wards in Ellesmere Port. And for us, people turning up will be an achievement. You know, people just turning up will be an achievement in year 1. In year 2 and year 3 and year 4, we might get further, but it's not something, but it's a good point, but it's something I think as a society we have to learn, and we have to not sort of just help people develop up that scale and have trust in the process. But I'm particularly talking about young people as well.
Yeah,
sorry.
I think and I think I would add to that by saying I used to do a summer project for I started off doing work with the zoo about disadvantaged young people, actually 10-year-olds, and we had this amazing summer program in a previous job that I did, and we did it over 4 years, and people were like, is it happening? Is it happening? And it was because there was a relationship. The zoo had a relationship with the school and they were engaged with it, and it wasn't just this one-off project that they went in. We then tried to replicate that project in Blaken, and it didn't work. And the reason it didn't work was because we didn't understand the context of Blaken, and the fact that, as Emma said, it was the simple barrier was about the showing up, and that they don't know how to engage with you. So for us, one of the big things with anything is you take it to them. You don't ask them to come to you. You find spaces, and if that's in the parade of shops, or if that's in the doctor's surgery on a Tuesday morning, find unusual spaces to listen to them. And it might be one person that you connect with then, and you build it from there. And I think that's the difference in how we've changed about where we meet. Is take it to them rather than expect them to come and open doors. There's a big initiative about giving free tickets to young people. And if free tickets could solve problems, then we'd all be good. But it doesn't, because what we've got to do is build the pathways for young people in Neston, in Northwich, to use our facilities. And it's recognising, how do you get them, and I talk a lot about this, how do you build the pathways for them to be able to confidently walk into that space, because some people don't feel they have that right. So it's not even a case of apathy, it's a case of, I won't be taken seriously, or I'm not a part of that. And I think that's the thing that has to change, is we have to find ways to make them feel that they're a part of it.
Okay.
I think that's probably true for other demographics as well. I think there's probably a degree to
yeah, because it's not just young people, is it, that we want to engage? No. It's older people, and it's the older people I've been having difficulty with over the last few years. Some have dropped out through age and whatever and illness, and then I can't recruit. I just can't get them because they don't want. They want to in theory, but when they have to put the effort in, it suddenly dissipates, we just don't get them. So I found that really difficult. But thank you very much to everybody's presentations, and I've taken quite a few snaps of things, and I'm sure we'll get them circulated, will we, Richard?
Yeah,
so
I'm sure we can do that. Yeah, if you could all send them to Beth, that would be great.
It was smashing.
I think that just the point I was going to make, that I think one of the overarching themes that's come through from this today is not about consultation in the way that we've done things before, but the council learning about civic participation, and that's what GFN Action Transport Theatre, and to a degree, you know, the access group, Cornell's access group, it's about people who are actually prepared to commit and give time. And I'm sure the trustees, from Gareth's perspective, in Neston, you know, to build a community organisation that actually takes people who are from a community, and then to deliver change in that community takes a whole load of commitment.
I'd look forward to. I look forward to more discussion around the transport issue, but I just can't stay any longer now.
No, that's fine.
That's all right. Okay, thanks, Richard. I'll speak to you soon.
No problem. I'll see you soon. Gareth, was it you that jumped in there, or Cornell? There was definitely a male voice that jumped in while we were talking.
I mean, unfortunately, she's gone. I was just going to say, from my point of view, I think apathy suggests a problem with the process rather than the people.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
So it's about the way in which you do it, not what you do.
Or, well, it could be what you're doing if it's not what people are interested in, or what people need or want.
It's that idea of being done too.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to have to bring in Sam Naylor because he's got another meeting too. So if we can move on to Sam, and then I'll bring in Charles and then Sam Dixon.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Just briefly, thanks for organising this, and thank you to the officers who've obviously put it together, and great input from the speakers. And I totally agree with Emma. I'd love, and we can take a lot of these kind of ideas to the Regeneration Forum, Richard, but I love the idea of a Northwich Community Youth Centre in the town centre. I think that would be great. And I loved, I've not spoken to Cornell before, and Cornell, you've got to do something about Northwich Railway Station, and you've got to have a look at our town centre, because I think there are real issues with the disability kind of access, that type of thing. So as soon as you can get into Northwich town centre, mate, please do. But I loved your picture of Town Bridge and the water, because that is our biggest asset. We don't use it. I was watching the Northwest News this morning. The thing that's really taken off, you can't even buy one, is waterboarding. And you just picture all the waterboards on the river there, on the Weaver. So I've picked up some really good ideas this afternoon, and thanks very much to all of you.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Thanks, Sam. Sam Dixon. No, Charles will go to next. I think you were waiting, weren't you?
Oh, thanks. Yes, I was distracted by delivery of a vegetable box, but there we go. I found all these very, very, very interesting. I've sort of come away with a thought that actually, when we're looking at sort of user group perspectives, we need to think of the 3 W's, which is who, why, and how. And the logic for that is who, because obviously I think a lot of this has been aimed at the thoughts of younger people, but also, you know, as Cornell has mentioned in relation to people with disabilities, but as Lynn mentioned before she went, was we also need to think about older residents as well. And so those who may well be disadvantaged for one reason or another, be that age at either end of the spectrum, be that income in relation to the economics of getting in and out of the town centre, or the access issue, be that, for example, your leg's not working well, or there not being the public transport. So as I say, that's made me sort of think about this, that there's a who, a why, and a how to look at this. I do think that we've potentially missed a trick in terms of not having a bit more about older residents. But I do know that Cornell, from the Disability Access Forum, one of the things that we are able to do there is that for a lot of us who've got the mobility issues, we are effectively experiencing old age a lot earlier than before. So I think there's elements of there is elements of that, and I think I mean a lot of what's been said is very good. And I was going to go and say to Una that that 7-year-old, please tell her about the profession of being a chartered surveyor, because she's got it in at age 7.
But she's not the only one. I just want to highlight. I think Gareth wants to say, and I think
Gareth, you can come in a second if you want.
Well, I think first of all, I think the name of our organisation kind of misleads people, which is why we're in the process of changing the name of the organisation. The building is Neston Community Youth Centre, and actually the smallest part of what we do, sadly, I have to admit, is around young people. Our client age group goes from birth to 101. Our registered clients are up to 101 years of age, and certainly the work we're doing is right across the ages from school age right the way through. We've got a massive befriending service for older people, which involves engagement with them and discussion with them around what they need and how the town could support them living longer, better lives.
Yeah.
We
Well,
talked
so
about. Sorry.
I would say my apologies if I've misunderstood that.
No,
that makes a lot
it's
clearer.
built in.
From the economic perspective, therefore, it's obviously you've got the grey pound. The purple pound is in relation to disabled people, and I just don't know if there's an equivalent phrase for younger people.
I think there is. I think this is what I think.
Contactless payments.
Yes, genuinely.
The contactless
virtual pound.
I think what's really interesting, I had this conversation. A couple of friends own bars in Chester, and they employ a lot of they're big bars, and they employ a lot of staff. And they said their staff have been furloughed, and for a lot of them, they've had more money than they've ever had because they've not been able to go out. And strangely enough, 3 of them have all bought kayaks, because I was laughing going, did you have a team discount on buying kayaks because of a Facebook post? And they said no, because they've got this income. And I think it's about a different set of values. And we looked at this, and this came out within this 21 to 25-year-olds who just graduated group. It's a different set of values. They want to spend locally. They want to shop locally. They want to walk. They care about the environment. There is a different agenda. And if we use the old models of how we see town planning, we will lose that, because actually, if you look at places like Lark Lane in Liverpool, if you look at Manchester and the Northern Quarter, that started as the alternative and is now the most desirable place to hang out, and Ancoats becomes then the next part. Then if you look at places like Bristol, which attracted a young audience in an area called Easton, which we've looked at. Easton was the place where young people moved to and Somalian families lived in. And that was about 15 years ago. Now it's probably the artsy, trendy, it's where the creatives live, and a house probably will cost you 350, 400,000, whereas 15 years ago it would have been 120 grand. And I think if we use the old models about how we engage with, the grey pound, and yes, I totally agree with you that the grey pound, there's a lot more money, right, in the sense, but they don't spend it in the same way. They don't invest it in the high streets. They might go to Storyhouse and spend £100 on 4 tickets or 3 tickets, but it's a different type of spending that they do. And I think that if we don't do something about that 20-something pound, I'm going to say the 20-something pound, we're going to lose it to places like Manchester, Bristol and Liverpool.
I also think that the grey pound is a lot more volatile in terms of spending. So the first thing that hits our centre is when it happened in 2008. It happened again in 2010. It's going to happen again now with the current crisis. Those are the clients that will stop spending in order to make sure that they're okay. And I totally get why that is, but it's certainly a lot more volatile.
That's really interesting. I wrote down when you were speaking a couple of you, I put we've got this kind of challenge of an ageing population from the data that we looked at the start of the meeting, this increase in kind of 65 plus group, but then this idea of how much we want young people to be involved in placemaking, and it's kind of this trade-off between
Richard,
two things.
what I would say is the population is ageing chronologically, but I don't think you'll find it's ageing attitudinally.
Yeah.
So what we might have thought of as plus 65 people attitudes 20, 30 years ago, when I was little and my grandparents, it's not the same now.
No.
I mean, I'm giving away ages, I'm heading that way. So.
Well, people talk about, I spoke at Black and White Chester, Emma I think was there, I'm not sure if she was, which was about how we need to listen more and co-create. I think his name was mentioned, Tim Kenny, who I think is a great guy, said to me, you're right, we absolutely need to start listening to people like you. And plan cities for people like you. And I said, I'm a 40-year-old woman. You absolutely do not need to plan cities around me. You need to think about, and that's it. It's that mindset of, how people live is evolving. You know, if you look at the Netherlands, the way in which families and the way in which people want to live, it's changing dramatically. If you look at all the reports in terms of cities and future-proofing cities and planning cities with people, Liminal has written a great report. We Are Liminal, if you want to search for them, wrote a great report on this, and it talks about changing attitudes of how we live in cities together, and it is about the environment. And it is about having things and services at your doorstep and not having to go somewhere else. And it's about rethinking everything, turn up the rule book and sort of saying, right, okay, what's going to attract people? And then building a strategy for that.
Okay, that's very good. Right, Sam Dixon, last question, last but not least again, I do apologise. I'm going to do it twice last today. Fire away.
Yeah, thanks. I've been doing a lot of listening to carry on the theme. So there's a couple of things that I found really discouraging from Una's presentation, and particularly what she said about Northgate and what young people's view of it is, because Northgate is actually a public space for community engagement. It's a multi-screen cinema, which is principally catering for younger people, but also a market hall with an incubator space in it. You know, those are the things you've just told us we need to have, and we are having. And if the message isn't getting through to young people, then we really need to start talking
and
about.
I think it is the latter, Sam, in terms
It's
of
latter.
Yeah,
well,
it's how that's
you know,
communicated.
I've got a house full of young people, and I'm trying my best.
Yeah.
The other thing is that we've spent £37 million on Storyhouse. We spent a lot more than £7,000 on Super Trees. I have to tell you, you can add a couple of noughts to that.
Yeah.
And we're spending a lot of money on Northgate, and I think the issue is about the city centre is. I see it, having represented it for 9 years, polarising a lot more than it has done in the past. And the issue about the demographics in the city centre is that there are no young people in there, or very few young people actually live in it. And the people who do live in it are well-to-do and well-heeled and have a very strong voice about what they expect to see in it. And it's playing out right now. So, for example, my youngsters want to go into town and go to the park. And the complaints I am getting about the use of the park is unbelievable. And, you know, Super Trees, fantastic. So much time and energy gone into that space. You know, my fellow ward councillor has shared with me today graffiti, urination, and a complete disregard for that space, which is so discouraging. And I just wanted to talk about enablers and what enables people to participate in their community. And it's money, you know, and we need to have a discussion about class as well, about poverty, and about how people who have no pounds, never mind a grey one, a pink one, a purple one, no pounds, how they participate and enrich a community. And I have to say it, and, you know, I won't be thanked for this, but a lot of middle class people talk an awful lot about Chester, and the voices, and Una talked about the hard to reach communities, those voices are not heard. And it's been my mission to try and make sure that the poorest people in our city actually get to participate in it. And it's hard. It's really, really hard to get that to happen. And the noisy voices are the people who are well-to-do. And, you know, Chester has the most expensive residential properties in the northwest outside of Manchester. And, you know, people cannot afford to live in Chester. And it's like, how do you build a vibrant and enriched community when that inequality is almost built into it? And I go round and round this in my head. You know, people come into the city with expectations. It's a small city centre. People feel that they have a an ownership of it. But it's like, how do we make sure that it represents all of the people who need to be part of this community? And the council spent such a lot of money in the city centre because the private sector hasn't been able to do it, you know, since the recession in 2008, and it hasn't come back in the way that we expected the private sector to come back. Or it comes in bubbles. So it's bubbles of student accommodation, it's bubbles of, you know, hotels. It's, you know, I don't have any answers really, and I've put a real downer on what was about the conversation. But I just get.
Sam, I think what you're saying is what we all think. I think people talk about Chester as this middle class place and they miss the nuances of it, and they miss the fact that when we spoke with so I'm a governor now at Blaken as well, and it's one of my favourite places because I think people underestimate Blaken young people day in, day out. And for me, I took my fellow GFNers on a workshop day there, and they had these stereotypes of the school, and their mind was blowing when they sat in a room with these teenagers who said they wanted to be barristers, and one of them said they wanted to be a neurosurgeon. And for me, that's the first thing, is don't ever underestimate our citizens, full stop, if you enable them to contribute. But going back to what you said about this idea of the investment, I think Emma hit on it. She said they don't know. They don't know. They don't know that the market is going to be for them. They don't know about the incubator space and how that's going to work for them, and that came through when we spoke to them. And bear in mind, when we talked about consultation, Steph and I've spoken about this, is that we put up billboards in shops and we asked people to go in for their opinions. We went in when it was Northgate 1 to a shop, and as you said, and we sat and stood waiting to speak. This was when they were talking about Northgate 1. And we must have stood for about 45 minutes while a member of the Chester City Centre Residents Association, who lived in a rather fancy house, complained and complained and complained. And we ended up leaving because we just said, this isn't it. So if I put myself, and I'm quite a bolshy female, if I was a 21-year-old, would I have stood around and even listened to that? Would I have felt welcome in that space? No, I absolutely wouldn't. So we need to find different ways to enable those voices, and it isn't sat alongside those people with privilege. And I think that it's about saying to ourselves, we're going to draw a line and we're going to go and have the difficult conversations with those kids. But Tate did this. Tate London, you know, Tate Modern, they recognised that their clientele was a very specific type of person, and they create this fantastic program. But what the first thing they did was they paid the young people, because they said you have to think about what if you want them to come and you want them to contribute, value their time by paying for their bus, providing them with food, and treating like their time is worth something. Because when you look at internships and we don't pay people, it rules out an entire class of young people, or, you know, your early 20s something, because we don't recognise that they do not have the resources to be able to access those opportunities. So I think something like that has to be taken in when you talk about class, and you have to say, right, well, we are going to factor in transport, we're going to factor in some sort of stipend to engage these young people in a different way. Because that worked with Tate, and it transformed how they did their widening participation work. And there's models and examples of that all up and down the country. Where
we did something similar with the Poverty Truth Commission, and we paid people's expenses to make sure that we valued their time inside that process. I'm just really conscious of time, and the discussion's really good. So it was only Gareth that had his hand up that was left. So I'm sorry, I'm just going to go to Gareth, and then we're going to have to cut it off there.
If I do it really quick, can Emma share it with me? If I'm really quick, can Emma share?
Go on then.
Okay.
1 minute each.
I think there's two things, Sam, and I think the first one is you talk about bubbles, and I think that the big thing that stands out for me is that those bubbles burst. All bubbles burst. So whatever those bubbles are, and I think you can see it in Liverpool, there is a massive accommodation in the city centre now. They're all empty. They're all empty. And how they're being funded, I have no idea, and I'm not going to ask the question. And I think the other bit is, I think there is an element of you can pay people. I think there is a systemic problem in that councils can invest in capital like that. They can't invest in relationships, and it's really, really difficult. Youth work, engaging with people, engaging with communities about relationships, and if you can't build them relationships and you haven't got the resources to do it, it makes it nigh on impossible.
Yeah.
So somewhere along the line, we need to get some of that capital money freed up to employ people to engage with people.
It's so
that's
hard,
a challenge.
Gareth. It's so
I know.
hard.
I know.
The revenue just isn't there.
Okay, sorry to interrupt everyone.
Emma, you're muted. Emma, you're muted.
You've got 1 minute, Emma.
Emma, you're muted. You're still muted.
I was just going to build on that point to say, I think that's why, and Ellesmere Port, actually, everybody thinks Ellesmere Port is you know, has real views about Ellesmere Port as well. But if you look at the socio-demographics, half of Ellesmere Port's like Chester and the other half is totally different. So you can't say about any of these places they're the same. And in fact, in Ellesmere Port, they should exploit the other half a bit more, perhaps. But what I would say is what we need to do is create spaces where you can go and be a community without having to spend money. So that is where the capital expenditure needs to be used to facilitate the creation of relationships by spaces that people can be in without having to spend money. My kids don't really spend money when they go to the park, but they need, and Claire's been there this afternoon in this horrible weather, they hang out and they create relationships there. So we've got, if we can't divert the capital to revenue, let's use the capital to create spaces that help communities and relationships to be built. Sorry, Richard, finished.
I also think you can.
Richard, you've muted yourself.
I'm muted now. I just wanted to thank you all for your involvement in this. I know you've had to give up your own time to be part of it, to join us today, and it's been really, really interesting. And I want to make sure that the things that we learn early in the commission lead into other things. And I think this idea about ownership and representation is really important across all of Cheshire West. In all of the towns, there are lots and lots of different groups that kind of are involved in the management of city centres, whether that's business improvement districts or kind of like town groups or regeneration groups that are inside the council. Now, it's made me think about what's the involvement of people in those groups from different demographics? How do we interact with people from different groups in different ways? And I think when we get to meeting 4, which is about business improvement district and different organisations that are in town centres, I think it will be really interesting for the members of the commission to ask questions about how those groups engage with communities and what's worked and what hasn't worked and what we think that we could recommend might be a better way forward, having listened to what we've heard today and listened to what we hear through the rest of the commission meetings. I think the points about involvement are really important. I think the points about access and about community use and about if you build in community use and you make it accessible for lots and lots of different groups in the community, it will bring people into town centres. And I know there are lots and lots of reports that have already talked about this kind of thing, but we have to come forward with some recommendations as a result of this work and then actually deliver on those things and make sure that this commission wasn't just a talking shop. Una talked about drawing a line under things that have happened in the past, and I think that's a really good idea, and I think we can learn from what we've done in the past, but draw a line under perhaps some of the things that might have not worked and try and move forward in different ways. I think the points around poverty and about involvement and about voices and how we try and tease out voices of people that perhaps are underrepresented in some of the decisions we make. I mean, I'm all for that, and it's a really important part of the council's 4-year plan, the Play Your Part plan, and I think this commission has to reflect the council's plan in that respect. So the bits that I would like to take forward, if we can, for who's minute in the meeting, is about what recommendations we make about involvement and about civic participation and about representation, about different ways that we can involve people in the work that we're doing, whether that be through town centre committees and things that we talked about in the first presentation by Sonia, about how we get more people involved. I think is the key message that we can take home from this. So people and placemaking, we all know that this is what we were all about in the first place when we started this commission, but to hear it from people who've done stuff has been really important. So thank you very much for your time, and you can watch the remainder of the commissions. They're all going to be put on the council's website if you wish to. And if you wish to stay involved and email me any further thoughts that you've got as we progress through the rest of the meetings, we'll be very glad to read your thoughts. I'm getting from a tea, and you should too.
Thanks,
Take
Rick.
care, everyone.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
Richard.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Richard.
Sarah.